Hello, BookTube. As some of you may know, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club and I have, for months now, been turning the title of his channel into a reality. We've made a little book club of two. It's been a great deal of fun. We've read all kinds of things, from classics to comic books to contemporary stuff. And for the month of May, we will be reading a political thriller. We'll be reading this, 7 Days in May, the best-selling 1962 novel by Fletcher Neville and Charles Bailey, the Boston journalist, Charles Bailey, which is a novel about a military plot to take over the United States government, a plot by the U.S. military to take over the United States government, take over its own government. I read this book when it first came out. It was a huge bestseller in 1962 and sold millions of copies. It was all anybody could talk about for a good long time. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for well over a year. And it got a whole bunch of ancillary deals that were often very lucrative back in those days. The Dollar Book Club, Reader's Digest, a massive paperback deal. I don't remember if it was Book of the Month Club or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if it were. People loved it. They gobbled it up and read it. And Matthew and I are reading it this month in roughly 100-page installments. And I don't know how many of you are reading along with us, but this is not my first encounter with this book, of course. I read it when it first came out, but it's also not my second encounter with this book. I found a paperback of this up in Vermont last winter and read it then. And that reread had been, I think, the first time that I reread this thing since it originally appeared, and put forward in the forefront of my mind an absolutely unavoidable thing that just is going to sit in your consciousness when you're reading this book in 2022. When this book originally came out, there had never been a coup, military or otherwise, against the United States government. And now in 2022, everyone reading this book has visual images. They have memories. There has been, in the interval, an armed insurrection to overthrow the United States government, execute a sitting vice president, nullify a legal election, and install an unelected person in power, illegally, presumably forever. The rereading this thing both in the winter and I'm rereading it slowly for this read-along, it's been impossible for me not to think about that. I've had to sort of admonish myself internally that that will not be what these read-along episodes are about. There's no way not to mention it up front, right? Just like if you were reading a 1962 book about first contact with aliens, and last January 6th, aliens had arrived on Earth. There would be no way for you not to mention it. So I'm mentioning it. But I'm going to try not to harp on it. I'm not going to draw any kinds of parallels or anything like that. That's not what you would come to a read-along of this book for. The only thing I want to say, just in a friendly manner, in passing, is that no matter what you think about my discussions of this book or Matthew's discussions of this book, what you think about the book itself, I don't want to see any comments in the comments field of this video or any other 7 Days in May read-along video of mine. You can do what you want. Matthew will decide what happens on his own channel. But I don't want to see any comments on these videos saying that the January 6th insurrection against my government did not happen. Okay? I don't imagine that I'm going to do that. I think I pretty much know you people by now. There's no denying the proof that's already come out, and yet a huge concerted effort has been made by the alt-right in this country to gaslight the country into saying that the January 6th insurrection never happened. I don't want to see that. I don't want to have to deal with that. I'm not telling you what opinions to have, but I am very much in this moment, just for the moment, telling you what not to put in the comment section of my video. Okay? I don't think it's an issue. I don't think it's going to come up. But I wanted to get all of that out of the way. There's really no way to talk about this book without getting out of the way the fact that we have now lived through an insurrection to overthrow the government. And it didn't come from the military. It would have been utterly unthinkable to Neville and Bailey when they wrote this book that the insurrection would come from the president. That would have been utterly unthinkable. So I wanted to get that out of the way, and now we'll move on to the book. Now, We'll be doing this without Matthew for this first 100-page or so installment. But he's given me full permission to talk to you myself. And we'll go over the book just a bit. I will deal a little bit more with analysis of what's done well and what's done poorly the further along we go. But for right now, we are basically this book breaks up into organic chunks so that you'll have a pretty organic sense of where to stop. The action starts on a Sunday, which once upon a time, I mean, now in the internet age, in the 21st century, that doesn't mean anything at all. But once upon a time, when this book was written, certainly when this book was conceived, the whole world shut down on Sunday. There was nothing at all that happened. There was no nothing at all. People went to church and then they had dinner, and that was true even of the military, where Sunday was very much a down day, very much an off day. And that's where the action starts here. It starts with a colonel named Jiggs, Colonel Jiggs Carter, who is working at the Pentagon. He is in charge of the Joint Staff, which does all of the staffing work for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he makes a point of going in on Sundays on a fairly regular basis, even though he knows that it's deadly dull, that it's going to be routine work. And in the course of his Sunday, he has a little bit of conversation with a junior officer who tells him, the junior officer is working in the communications shop, and is telling him about some of the messages that have come through his shop, just to make conversation, not to report to him in any way. And the junior officer tells Jiggs that one of those messages involves James Mattoon Scott, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a very, very popular, charismatic general with the American people. At the moment when this story opens, far more popular than, for instance, President Jordan Lyman, who's at a rock bottom with popularity as the story opens, just about to get a Gallup poll that polls him at the lowest popularity ratings of any president as long as they've been conducting the poll. So at this moment, General Scott is a far more liked figure by the populace. And he is Jiggs' immediate superior. But he's not there. There's hardly anybody there at the Pentagon on this Sunday, the Sunday when the story opens, because the story does take place over the course of 7 days. And the junior officer mentions, among other things, that he decoded a message from General Scott to various other military commanders in key positions. The military barracks, the head of the Navy, the head of communications, all that sort of thing, asking them for their bets in his betting pool on the Preakness. The bet's due on Saturday, due the coming Saturday. And Jiggs is a little scandalized. He doesn't feel it's right that he should know any of his boss's private business, that the rank hath its privileges, right? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff can use coded messages for private business if he feels like it. And he lightly reprimands the junior officer, but thinks nothing more of it. And eventually his duties bring him to the junior officer's communication shop itself, where follow-up messages come in from one of the recipients, an admiral of the Navy, saying no bet, saying he's not in on the betting pool, which strikes both the junior officer and Jiggs as a little weird. Odd enough that these officers are all obsessed with horseback betting, but that an admiral wouldn't be in on it, would just say, I don't have a bet, I'm not involved. It strikes an odd note with Jiggs. But he thinks nothing of it, and he simply continues about his business. But over the course of the next day, over the course of the next 12 hours, 20 hours, more and more things start happening that also strike him the wrong way. There's a meeting, for instance, of heads of different branches of the military conducted by General Scott. And when the meeting is over, Jiggs finds a crumpled up piece of paper that one of them had scrawled at the meeting, talking about troop carriers going out on the day of an upcoming super secret military alert to major cities in the United States and also to Utah. This coincides with something that Jiggs has already heard from a friend of his, Mutt Henderson, tells him that he is the executive officer at a secret military installation that's brand new outside of El Paso, and that his commanding officer is Colonel Broderick, who's a known scenery-chewing fascist, hates civilian rule, hates civilian government. And Jiggs, keep in mind, he's in charge of the Joint Staff. He should know about this military installation, which will have, thousands of men, hundreds of officers. He should know about it, and he doesn't. He's never heard of it before. He pretends that he has, because he doesn't want his friend to know. But he has never heard of it, and he assumes that it must be part of this body, this group that his friend tells him about, called Ecomcon. Jiggs can't make any sense of this at all, and it unsettles him. He's a longtime Marine career man. It unsettles him professionally that he would get word informally from his friend, who assumes he knows, about an entire military base that he's never heard of. And the crumpled piece of paper seems to say that the entire force at that military base is going to be airlifted out to various points in the country during a super secret military alert. Now, the secret military alert the president knows about, and Jiggs knows about it, and of course Scott set it up, but very few other people do. No one in Congress is supposed to know. It's supposed to simulate an all-out military attack, in this case from Russia, and it's supposed to gauge how quickly the United States armed forces, Navy, Air Force, Marine, everybody, can get themselves into complete readiness. So ready to launch, ready to go. How many minutes will that take? And it's also meant to test a new communications cut-in system that would allow the president from a secure bunker to take control of the major networks. This is, keep in mind, well before the internet. So where you could cut into those networks and control them. There had been a previous super secret military drill like this, and most of the departments had gone very poorly. The lag times had been terrible. It showed a military that was not in combat readiness. That's ostensibly one of the reasons for this new drill, which Congress doesn't know about, the press doesn't know about, most of President Lyman's advisors don't know about it, including Paul Girard, his closest advisor, his really right-hand man in the White House. None of these people know about this alert. Just various heads of various military branches, the president, and Jiggs. But for the life of him, Jiggs can't figure out, okay, event or no event, secret alert or no secret alert, why would you need to airlift troops? That's not part of this at all. It's getting your forces ready to go outside the United States. It's not getting your forces ready to occupy cities, much less commandeer those cables, those communication cables in Utah. The system's already in place. Why would you need men to secure it? He's also bothered by something else that his friend Mutt tells him, which is that in the drills that they've been doing at Site Y, that mysterious military base outside of El Paso, most of what they've been doing has been concentrated on seizing installations rather than protecting them. Most of what they've been drilling for is how to take over a key installation and hold it against enemy fire, which doesn't seem, it strikes Jiggs as immediately wrong. Mutt Henderson also thinks it's weird. Why would they be doing that? Why would that be part of military readiness for seizing communications, for defending installations in the United States? Why would you concentrate on seizing things? All of these things boil together in Jiggs's mind and bother him in a way that he hasn't been bothered in a long time. He knows that President Lyman is unpopular with the military because a year ago he negotiated a treaty with the Russians that would work slowly, incrementally, to dismantle both nations' nuclear arsenals. And the military believes that the Russians will break the deal. It's the Iran nuclear deal all over again. They believe that the Russians aren't good for their word, that they will secretly be building nuclear devices and fooling American inspectors, that the treaty is a waste of time and makes America vulnerable. They're very angry about it, most especially General Scott. who hasn't really made it official in the newspapers, but it's pretty clear to everybody on Capitol Hill where he stands on this treaty. And it becomes clear in an ominous kind of way. The moment of the culmination of this military exercise on the following Saturday is the time mentioned in that dispatch to Scott's friends when the betting will come due on the Preakness. These things jumble together in Jiggs's mind. There's a wonderful little contemplative scene where he's looking at the muddy waters of the Potomac and they muddy in his mind together into something he cannot ignore. He's a thoroughgoing man of routine. He is not a genius. He is not a bright light. He's a dutiful Marine. But these things combine in his mind to something that he can't ignore. Especially since when he's at a party, routine house party in the Washington environs, that has Paul Girard is there representing the White House. There are a whole bunch of other people, including a very powerful senator, Senator Prentice, who's there, who's on the Armed Services Committee and whatnot. And everybody's chatting, and their wives are chatting separately, and everyone's drinking and having food and whatnot. And at one point, as they're parting ways, the senator pats Jiggs on the back and says, "Well, we've all got to be on alert, right? Especially Saturday." And then he walks off. And Jiggs makes a lame response, but in his mind, all the alarm bells are going off because it's a clear allusion to this super secret military drill that Prentice shouldn't know about. This only gets worse when a little family emergency causes Jiggs to drive out at night to go pick up one of his sons who has a flat tire, and he drives past Scott's his house, the house that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff uses, and he sees Prentice's car in the driveway at midnight, at 1 in the morning. And when he talks to Scott about the party the next day, Scott tells him, "Well, I got to bed at 10, had a wonderful night's sleep." A clear lie. Jiggs can't figure this out. He has never seen his boss behave this way before. And eventually it becomes too much for him. And the pages that we're reading today end with him going to the White House. He talks to Paul Girard. He and Paul Girard are old friends, and insists that he needs to meet with the president alone. Girard resists at first, but eventually gives Jiggs his way and gives him access to the president alone. And he lays it all out for Jordan Lyman and says, if you told me that you'd ever heard of Ecomcon, well, I'd have been frustrated and a little embarrassed, but I'd have gone on my way. But to hear you say that you've never heard of it, if I have clearance, you certainly do, frightens me. And Jordan Lyman tells him, you have a problem with plain language, mister? And Jiggs tells him, no, but the plain language, once they get to it, is horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. The plain language, as Jordan Lyman and Jiggs eventually speak out loud, is that Jiggs may have uncovered, accidentally, plans for General Scott and key members of the U.S. military to take over the government. Because think about that military alert, right? It'll look like the real thing. The Army will be cutting in on communications, and the president will be alone in a reinforced bunker in a military base, surrounded by Scott's own men. A thing that he had signed off on and was perfectly willing to do, and only now realizes is incredibly ominous. If Scott and his collaborators didn't have the best interests of the country at heart, they would have the president's physical body, and they would also have the means of communication. There wouldn't be anything Jordan Lyman could do about it. Congress will be in session, will be in recess during this alert. The vice president will be on a tour of Italy during this alert. It looks like it has been carefully planned to look like an alert in order to fool the president and the people around him. There'll be no press present. General Scott is adamant about that. You can't bring press with you to that reinforced headquarters because this has to look like the real thing. And that is where we end. That is where we'll end the segment that we're reading today. Really, that's sort of an organic place to end, is that the president tells Jiggs, all right, well, you realize you could be busted out of the service for telling me what you've told me tonight, but okay, I thank you for coming in. He dismisses him. There's a wonderful little moment where he shakes Jiggs's hand, and we're told that although Jiggs felt no pressure or pull in any given direction, he found himself moving towards the door. Believe you me, lifelong politicians master that technique of moving you with the handshake to get you out the door. The president calls in Paul Gerard and tells him everything that he didn't know, including telling him about the secret alert. And the action that we'll end with today ends with President Jordan Lyman in a horrible position. He is hoping that there is somehow an innocent answer, an explanation for all of this that doesn't involve the unthinkable. But he says that he wants to operate under the assumption that it's true, rather than be caught completely unawares. And he is faced with the decision in that moment of, well, I need a team. I can't handle this myself. It can't be me, Paul Gerard, and one, Marine colonel. I need a team of people to handle this. And he has to figure out who can do it. Who can he trust? Who'll be any use? Who can keep it to themselves? He comes up with a small group, and we'll be talking about that small group next time as they get into action next week. So, as we wrap up this first segment, I really want to know, are you reading along? And are you liking it? Are you noticing any ticks on the part of the authors? Maybe any period stuff? I'm sure that you're noticing period stuff. We'll go through a bunch of that when we get a little bit more analytical about the book. It's very much a book of its time. I'm, if anything, surprised at how well it has aged. In terms of the prose, in terms of the characterizations, the action, even the language. I'm amazed that it doesn't feel more of a period piece than it is. But I'll be curious to know what you make. Had you ever read this before? Have you ever seen, for instance, the famous Burt Lancaster movie, which is very different from the book, but it was also incredibly popular. I'd be curious to know what your experience with this book is, or are you reading it for the first time? And that's it for today. We'll resume our read along next week with the next 100 pages, basically the next day, maybe day and a half in the storyline. But I'm gonna wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Hope you're enjoying this, and I'll see you next week. Thank you, BookTube.